We're going to introduce the speakers individually each time before the speech, and maybe a few words before we start. I'd like to thank very much Steffi Czerny and Marcel Reichert, of course, Hubert Burda, also Johannes Fricke and the whole DLD team. And the idea here is really to do a panel with 11 speakers, a very polyphonic panels on maps in the 21st century. The idea always to play around with formats of panels, not just have a few speakers and a Q&A, but to try out other experiments. It all started actually with Hubert Burda and Christa Maas Academy for the Third Millennium, when we did with Ernst Pöppl the Art and Brain Conference in the mid-90s, where we did a conference which only happened as a coffee break. We cancelled the conference and it was a coffee break. Then Bridge the Gap at CCA Kitakyushu, where we locked all the speakers in a remote house in Japan and they couldn't leave anymore. That produced an interesting type of conference. Laboratorium, where the whole city became a laboratory in the conference, so the conference went beyond the walls. Then the marathons, which started in 2005 in Stuttgart and are now part of the Serpentine Annual Architecture Commission, from the interview marathon with Rem Koolhaas to the more recent poetry marathon, and as of more recently the Brutally Early Club, where we gather a conference type of salon at 6:30 a.m. in London, very early in the morning, and that's the sort of salon for the 21st century. So we thought for DLD, when we brainstormed, that it could be wonderful to do actually a polyphonic panel on maps, where we have 11 artists, web designers, architects, filmmakers present their map for the 21st century. Somehow we felt that the multidimensional kind of notion of maps, it could be nice to have 11 speakers because of the superstring theory and the 11 dimensions, and sort of evolving around the notion of mapping, the panel condenses really how artists, designers and scientists apply maps to intersect visual arts, concept storytelling, statistics, computer-based design and also science. The internet, I think, has increased very much the presence of maps in our thinking, and it has maybe become very easier to make maps, to change them, and also to work on maps collaboratively and collectively, and also to share them. So depicting not mere geographical areas, these multidimensional maps express a vast area of interconnected ideas, and we can maybe say that after the strong focus on social networks in the last couple of years, it's maybe now a moment to focus on the location, as we discussed with many of the speakers before, as a new key dimension. So the idea is to have this short 7-minute presentation and then have a discussion. And I'm starting right away with our first speaker. I'm very, very happy to introduce Rosa Barba, who is an Italian-born artist living in Berlin. After studying film and visual art, she has developed extraordinary films of invisible landscapes, has participated in this year's Venice Biennale, and many other shows, Palazzo Grassi in Venice. And she presents here 3 different kinds of maps. She will present a special web commission she developed for the DIA Art Foundation in New York. She will present us also a map of an island on the move, where we no longer know really to which geography, to which nation the island belongs. And last but not least, she will present actually a sort of a short extract of a new film related to land art, where she actually found a track in Utah. A very warm welcome to Rosa Barba.
Good evening. I will start with a piece called Vertiginous Mapping that was commissioned by the DIA Art Foundation. And as in all my works, I start from historical facts or from little happenings in society and then create a fiction to kind of open up new possibilities. So this map is called Forgotten, and it's combining two facts. The city Alcuna, which I renamed, is in the north of the Arctic Circle, and I shot a 16mm film from this city that must be relocated due to the ground instability caused by massive mining by a company that I renamed to Urban Future Organization Science Division. I will show an expert. There's no sound. So the actual city was built in the 50s as a highly planned, climate-adapted model community where a building was successfully coordinated with terrain in order to mitigate the cold winds. And it has to be relocated now, around 12 kilometers. Sorry. Oh, can I go down? Sorry, it's a little bit slow. Okay, so the other fact that I interweaved into the map is the movement of in 1967, where in Sweden they changed from left driving to right driving, which is here. And I went into Swedish archives. It was planned like a revolution. So every day in the news, someone was reminding to read the book about how to actually change the side of the road. Be louder. Okay, I go to the next project. So in 2007, I shot a film about an island that is the heart of the Baltic Sea called Gotska Sandön. And actually this island is moving every year for 1 meter. And it's changing also direction. So at the moment it moves towards Russia. And the Swedish government is trying to save its identity by placing a lighthouse keeper there who is switched every 6 months to another person. And I made a film where I interviewed and integrated a lot of experts' opinions about how they think you can hold an island on its place. And so there was an archivist and politicians and an architect, and everyone is giving its idea and more entering the fiction. And then there is a stage scene where actually a community is really trying to hold the island but with big ropes, and they are creating in the end a sculpture. So maybe we show DVD. The DVD, please.
Jag tillfrågade om att göra någonting kring Gotska Sandön som flyttar sig norröver. Nu var tanken att man skulle stoppa det här på något sätt. Och då kan man göra det på flera sätt. Eller rättare sagt, man kan inte stoppa det, men man kan få det att bromsa ner. Man kan få det att ta längre tid. Och då skulle man kunna använda sig då av nät som man la ner i marken och förankrad med pålar eller man borrade ner då eller blåste ur med rör. Man kan ju trycka ner rör samtidigt som man blåser ur dem eller borra ur dem. Och det som man skulle kunna tänka sig var ju annars att man hade någon form av man skulle kunna tänka sig att man utnyttjar den här strömmen och det här starka vattenflödet här innan ön till att man skulle kunna använda det till exempel till att hitta vattenkraft.
Yeah, the film is half an hour long, and this is only a short. Then the last and most recent project I'm still working on, called Structures, I filmed provisional race tracks in the desert that are kind of just left behind after being used for a few weeks, and they create enormous drawings of earthworks, and I'm editing the film the way that it's kind of all connected to a big drawing. Oops, sorry. Okay, I think I give the word to Joseph.
Thank you so much. Many thanks to Rosa Barber. Before we continue with our next speakers, maybe a few more comments on the panel. The idea is also that this is a panel which produces a book. It's a kind of a book machine. So as we speak, hour by hour, maps pop in from all over the world. So maybe I can show you a few. So if we could have, please, those images of the maps. If we could go through those very quickly. There were a few maps we wanted to show at the beginning. We have maps from Julieta Aranda, Rosa Barber, Ed Rocher, Maurizio Cattelan, Rivane Neunschwander, Simone Forti, Couchonga, Andri Sala. Here is Maurizio Cattelan's map. QJ, Philippe Arnaud, Pay White, Starman Design, Aaron Koblin. All these maps have arrived. Can we have the next map, please? Here, Susan Hillos, a group dream map, a collective map she drew. Next map, please. Toyo Ito, architect from Tokyo, his map. Next map. This is Kevin Kelly's map. This just to give you a little bit of an idea of this being a process. So it's not a panel about something which is already concluded, but it's a panel about something which is in the making. We're very thankful also to the Great Area Foundation for the Arts, to GAFTA.org for the collaboration. You'll hear about that later, to John Brockman, also to David Rowan, who have all given us very important advice preparing this panel. Here, a map by Nancy Spiro, a map of heaven and hell. Now I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker, Joseph Penninger. Joseph Penninger studied medicine in Innsbruck. He worked for 13 years actually as a full professor of immunology and medical biophysics in Toronto, and moved then in 2003 to Vienna to become the founding director of the newly established Institute of Molecular Biotechnology. He has since then produced amazing amount of works, more than 350 articles. His discoveries range actually from the first genetic description of a key regulator of bone loss to more recently actually an entirely new regulator of fever and regulated wound healing, which is a very recent discovery. Joseph will present here an actor semiotic map, actually a connection to economy, where he connects to economist maps and looks at large-scale population. He will present a global map of obesity, as well as also a map for a model of heart failure. A very warm welcome to Joseph Penninger.
So thanks for inviting me. This is what interests me. So and many other geneticists, we want to understand the genetic world at the functional level. So we know human genes, bacterial genomes, the genes of viruses, mice, rats. But the question, of course, is what does it all mean? People are mining the oceans for new organisms. But at the end of the day, we have to understand what these genes are actually doing in our bodies, and if we can describe them at the complete systems level to basically understand that the entire system, heart failure, pain perception, or obesity. So this was the original things as we did it. This is a little embryo, so we used to make knockout mice, so basically genetically change in an embryo genes, create a new organism, and then ask the question, what are these genes actually doing in an entirely organism which lives, which breathes, has social interaction. And this was one of our early mice we made, the little one on the bottom. So at the end of the day, it turned out we hit the gene where you got the mouse, which was tiny. So we do mouse genetics, this is where I come from. The heads had changed. And at the end of the day, we actually hit the master regulator of bone loss. And we could, at the molecular level, explain bone loss and osteoporosis, where people get crippled in arthritis, where old people lose their teeth, where kids with leukemia develop bone loss, where asthmatics have bone loss, why there's bone loss in space travel. So if we one day might travel to space, the problem is nobody of us could walk anymore. But all goes through the system. We could explain bone loss and cancer metastasis and prostate cancer and breast cancer. And based on this little mouse, there's actually now drug development, which went through phase 3 clinical trials. And the data are the 2 injections per year with a new medicine are sufficient to block bone loss, meaning break of vertebrae, and women with osteoporosis by 70%. So that's the reason why we try to mine the genome for functions. And by figuring out how it's working, we could come up with entirely new medicines, which literally, maybe already starting this year, could benefit millions of people in the future. When I moved to Vienna, so the question was, where do we go from now? Because if you think there are 30,000 genes in mice, and we go from one gene to the next, so it's very cumbersome and, of course, very simplistic to describe life at the single gene level. So we decided to use a model organism, and I just love flies. And so the first person I hired in our new institute created, and it's still the only mutant fly library on the planet. So they shut down any gene in the entire fly genome, and you basically can mine at the entire level of an organism, the entire genome, meaning you can shut down genes only in the brain, only in the heart, only in the fat of these flies, and then ask the questions, which genes, when they're changed, would give you a fat fly or a skinny fly. And then the idea was to connect a functional map of one entire organism with genome-wide association maps, as they're being built now in many institutions, where people describe genetic susceptibilities to cancer or heart failure or to obesity, which of course at the end of the day is a mathematic model and approximation, because at the end of the day we do not know if the genes people predict could control these diseases actually relevant. So we're actually jumping from flies into humans, from humans back into flies, and finally to really figure out functional relevance, we go into mutant animals, a mouse, and ask the question, when we change this gene, do you get the mouse which is skinny or fat? And it is the real networks which control basic physiology and disease. So one of the issues which interested me was obesity. There's around, the last estimates, I think, 1.3 billion people are obese. There's some curious issues, like in Cameroon, 20% of people are undernourished, but 35% of people are obese. Mexico is the second most obese place on the planet, so it's not just an issue of rich countries anymore. And we realized you can actually make flies fat and skinny. So we actually started 5 years ago. So this is work of 5 years of many students and people we collaborated with, 2 million individual experiments later, which allowed us to create the first functional map of obesity. Basically, we found genes, when you change them in the brain of the fly, you get the skinny fly. Or a fat fly, we found genes, when you change them in the fat of the fly, they get skinny or fat. We also developed now diabetes models where you can actually go into one organism, mine the entire genome, get network maps, and describe physiology and disease at that level. So at the end of the day, you come up with maps like this. So a network map, so this is worked by bioinformaticists who spent months on this 2 million of data sets, created networks, new maps of essential pathways which are required for obesity or fat metabolism. And one of the pathways which interested us was on the bottom here, a little thing called hedgehog. Cancer biologists knew it because it controls cancer. So we thought this is interesting, maybe this thing also controls obesity. We shut it down in animals, and this is what we got, a mouse which is entirely skinny. And the reason is why this mouse entirely skinny, because turns out hedgehog is a pathway which tells our stem cells to become a bad, as we call it, bad white fat cell. And if hedgehog is changed, we basically wipe out the entire lineage of white fat cells. And there's a second fat cell in our body called the brown fat cell, which is actually good because it burns a lot of fuel. And brown fat cells in this animal is entirely normal. So if there's a holy grail in obesity research, it would be great if you could selectively turn on the good fat and selectively get rid of the bad fat. Another pathway which interested us, unfortunately the movie doesn't work, but that's actually fly heart. And if the movie would work, we would see actually how the heart beats. So flies have hearts which are beating. They beat around 100 beats per minute. Many of the pathways which control heart failure in humans control heart failure in flies. We can make flies which get arrhythmic, die of irregular heartbeats. We have flies which have dilated myopathies, so they get severe heart disease. So we also developed a model of stress-induced heart failure in flies. Again, 5 years and 2 million experiments later. Something we have not published yet, but which is coming out soon. So we allowed us to create the first systems map of heart failure in any organism at the systemic level. And for instance, some of these little things, all of them represent genes. One of them we changed in mice. I won't show you this data. You get actually mouse which get heart failure. And then we realized the same gene turned up in human genome-wide association studies for young adults which died of acute heart failure. So you can actually indeed data mine in Drosophila, find entirely new pathway. This thing had never been associated with heart function or heart disease. Go in there and find genes which are indeed relevant for humans. And the last thought I want to leave you with, we actually did maps for pain perception. We made pain models for smoking. You might know nicotine is one of the best insecticides you can find out there for leukemia. So we have leukemia models. And again, create systems map in one organism with relevance to human disease. And I actually also believe this might be an interesting new business model because these maps allowed us to find entirely new pathways for obesity, heart failure, and pain perception, pathways nobody had known before, and actually where already medicine is out there for different diseases. And actually these maps might allow us to jump over 4 or 5 years of drug development and repurpose drugs for entirely new uses. And this is the thought I want to leave you with. Systems map and genetics, of course many people do genetic mining, allow us to create functional maps of physiology, disease, and these networks might actually be one day of interest to make some money. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Joseph. I've got the great pleasure now to introduce our next speaker, Aaron Koblin. Aaron is an artist specializing in data visualization. Actually, global and local data is unified in his work, and his work helps us to understand actually really everything from commerce to the human urge to celebration. He's participated in many international festivals, including Ars Electronica, the Japan Media Arts Festival, and also TED, and has received the National Science Foundation's First Place Award. A very warm welcome to Aaron Koblin.
Yeah, please, thanks. Excuse me one quick second. Thank you. Thanks very much. Yeah, that's correct. My name is Aaron Koblin. I'm an artist and designer living in San Francisco and also currently working at Google's Creative Lab. I'm just going to show you a few of the data visualization projects I've worked on over the last couple of years. And I'm going to try to do that fairly quickly, so bear with me. This is a look at air traffic over North America for 24 hours. This is, so what you're about to see now is nighttime. You see the red-eye flights moving from the West Coast to the East Coast. And then you're going to see the East Coast wake up right about now as the European flights come down and everybody moves from the East Coast to the West Coast and eventually down to Hawaii. This is a visualization that I did at UCLA when I was in a design media arts program. I think it's one thing to say that there's 140,000 planes over North America, but it's another thing to see that system kind of ebb and flow and get a sense of the superstructure and influencing factors. This is looking at those aircraft color-coded by type, so you can see the different diversity of airplanes. These are a couple zoom-in images. This is looking at Southern California. You see Los Angeles in the bottom middle, and San Francisco in the upper left of the Bay Area, and then the no-fly zone over Nevada. In these images, the blue and white represents altitude, so you can actually see as planes descend into airports. This is looking at the New York area and East Coast. You can see some of the congestion that occurs there. So I took this data and created a series of images that I put into Google Maps so you can actually zoom around and look at specific areas. This is looking at Atlanta, which is a major hub for transportation, particularly for packaging and shipping. And you can also toggle on both model and make views, so you can see different types of aircraft going into the airport. This is another look at Atlanta. I actually haven't shown anyone these images yet, but I'm starting to look at descending and ascending patterns. So this is looking at the airport over time, and so you can specifically see like some holding patterns will start to develop. Right there, you see one. You'll see a couple others pop up. You can also see how planes take off, and later in the day, the airport actually switches, and you see takeoffs and landings reverse on which runways they're flowing on. So immediately following graduate school, I had the opportunity to work with the Sensible Cities Lab at MIT and started visualizing some data from AT&T about infrastructure. So this is a globe that we set up at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and it was a live visualization of how New York communicates with the rest of the world. So we were looking at the relationships of New York to international cities over time. This is through IP flow data, so we looked at both peer-to-peer connections, email, and we also looked at long-distance telephone calls. So this is a closer look at the boroughs. We subdivided the boroughs into sections, and you're able to kind of get a sense of demographics by, as seen through the infrastructure. So this is looking at which subsection of New York communicates with which other part of the world. Another project I worked on with Sensible Cities Lab was using KPN telecom data, and this is SMS messages being sent in the city of Amsterdam. So what you're seeing here is the daily ebb and flow of people sending text messages from different parts of the city. And then what we're going to see is, as it approaches New Year's Eve, everybody wants to send their friends and family a Happy New Year text, and that happens right there. This is another more geo-specific visualization. Again, you'll see the ebb and flow happening here. This is called Queen's Day, and everybody's now centered in the middle of the city to celebrate that holiday. You also get to see the setup before. So now I'm working at Google. This is a sneak preview that I actually haven't shown anyone yet of something in development. I'm working with my coworker Mike Chang and the awesome Google Trends team at the Israeli R&D Center. Actually, Yossi, who runs it, is over here. This is looking at search queries, so you can actually plug in whichever term you want. This is now looking at Lady Gaga, and you can see how that term is represented across the planet. It also has an animation feature, which I'm still working on. You can see historical data played through the globe. This is looking at earthquakes. No surprise, there's a big interest in Los Angeles over earthquakes. Moving on, there's another product at Google called TV Ads. And for those of you who aren't familiar, it's basically an online marketplace for buying and selling national cable advertising. They have some really interesting data from set-top boxes about kind of usage and demographics and loyalty. But what's really interesting about this data is it has kind of a rhythm and beat to it. I'm not sure if we have audio on here. Doesn't seem like we do, but basically, so basically what's happening is you see different rhythms. I'm not a sound engineer, but I was really interested in kind of how you could sonify this data and if you could get a sense of the patterns and rhythms that are going through it. So this is looking at oxygen. That's a lot of fluctuations in it. And this is Bloomberg TV. If you could, or maybe I can just play the audio through here if you don't mind. Well, you're not getting much of it, but basically you can see it's a monotonous tone through the weekdays, and then nobody on the weekends. So each channel really does have kind of a different life of its own. Here's a few of the different patterns. And if you can imagine what they might sound like, that's what I'm trying to play with, a way that you can use sound to represent this data. This is looking at a much more event-driven channel. This is CNN. So something like, it's the exact opposite of something like Bloomberg, where you have a constant rhythm. This is really kind of an active thing. This is looking at the inauguration. And this is a little bit about loyalty. Gives you a sense of how many different options there are for different types of content and how much allegiance there is on weekdays for things like Bloomberg. Very quickly, a completely different project. This is a music video that I made for the band Radiohead. It's a different take on mapping. We were measuring 3D space with laser scanners and basically collecting a bunch of scenes and collected some geometry of Tom York's face. And we released the project as an open source music video on Google Code, where people can actually download all the data that we use to make the video without video. And people are now making their own versions of the video. There's one with Legos and a pinboard. And more recently, somebody actually printed out Tom York's face using the data that we provided. Very quickly, I'm going to end with a more abstract art project that I've been working on. This is one of a series of Mechanical Turk-based projects that I've worked on. For any of you that aren't familiar with Mechanical Turk, it's a web service by Amazon, and it basically allows you to employ people through the internet, something that I had really mixed feelings about. I think it's kind of amazing to think of the API that you could get for human brains, where instead of 2 + 2, you might get swordfish, or 5 or 4, who knows. But I think it's really interesting that there's this anonymous labor system. But I also had some mixed feelings, so I wanted to do a more abstract visualization of that kind of system. I decided to team up with my friend Takashi Kawashima and begin using Mechanical Turk for exactly what it's meant for, which is making money. So I created a drawing tool that you could log into and actually get a very small drawing that you would then recreate. And I gave it to 10,000 people and paid them 1 cent, which was the value of their 10,000th of a $100 bill that they received. And as each one of them drew this little piece with no idea of what it was they were doing, they created this massive $100 bill. And then we took that $100 bill and put it online, and people are actually now able to trade real $100 bills for these $100 bills, and it goes to a $100 laptop, now known as One Laptop Per Child Foundation. This is that whole bill being drawn all at once. As I said, there's a number of other collaborative art projects that I've been working on. If you have a moment, you can check them out at aaroncopeland.com. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Many thanks to Aaron. Now got the great pleasure to introduce, but before that maybe, because Aaron did a poster, a few words on the poster project. This is not only a book machine, we're producing a book here, we're also producing a poster machine. Many of the participants have produced posters, and you're welcome to take those posters away at the end of the talk. So book machine, poster machine. I've got now the very great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Peter Hirschberg. Peter Hirschberg has many parallel realities. He has had a 9-year tenure at Apple Computer. has then been chairman of Technorati and has in that function dealt with huge XXL amounts of data and also mapping. He's been chairman of many different companies, of Interpacket Networks, of Gloss.com, and so on. And more recently, in his recent work, he's more and more actually bringing together art and technology. And as he told me earlier today, maps play an ever-increasing role in this activity. A very warm welcome to Peter Hirschberg.
Thank you. Can I do a sound check with you? Good sound. And a PowerPoint. Yeah, I'm not getting any sound. Right, we are getting sound. Great. Can you hear me okay? Great. Throughout the DLD, you may see on the walls a number of works where digital art and data have come together. These are all projects of an organization that we started in San Francisco called the Gray Area Foundation of the Arts. And it's a collective where people like Aaron, who's one of our co-founders, and Eric Rodenbach from Stamen, we've come together to explore digital arts and culture, the area where those meet. And it turns out that maps play a very important role here. And yet, as advanced as this stuff is, as we started looking back, this urge to take data and explain things to us through art goes back through time. Aaron, as I was preparing for this talk, I found a film from 1951 that talked about data and cities that's remarkably like the work that you've done. So I want to start with a clip from the past before we rocket forward and talk about the world where art and technology come together. Here's a film from 1951.
In the mornings, Manhattan acts like a heart and draws in the workers from their homes in the surrounding areas. The streets become filled with crowds of workers and shoppers. Then, in the evening, the workers stream home again. And the business section becomes a ghost city. And so, by day and night, year after year, these arteries of New York throb steadily, their pulse timed to the life of the city.
Our world owes a debt of gratitude to the modern mapmaker, who shall toil in obscurity for yet another 50 years, until that day in 2010, when the mere cartographer reemerges on the world scene as fabulous conceptual artist, toast of the international set, heralded by none other than Hans Ulrich, as DLD maps the 21st century. I changed the ending of that 1951 film a little bit. You know, for us in Silicon Valley, we're always focused on what's new. After all, DLD, we're excited to hear the latest thing where technology and media come together. But it turns out that there are parts of our culture that when you introduce the new, you actually cause mischief. And this is something I found working with Josette Melcher, our founder at Gray Area Gallery, which is that when you bring art and technology together, you often have some explaining to do. Because where they meet, people ask you a lot of questions. Actually, they first met, that first meeting took place on January 7th, 1839. Louis Daguerre, an artist, unveils photography. The public is delighted. So you'd figure that the French avant-garde, the DLDers of the day, would be delighted as well. You would be wrong. Charles Baudelaire, the bad boy of French literature, who was a rebel, always pushing the limits, didn't take it well. Upon seeing photography, new media for the first time, he wrote, "If photography is allowed to supplement art in some of its functions, it will soon have supplemented or corrupted it altogether." Or, to put it in a manner that we today might understand more relevantly, Baudelaire said this was a serious diss. He went all caps on the invention of photography. You get the picture. And it turns out that whenever something new is invented, we have explaining to do. And you don't even need a lot of hardware or chemicals to piss off the cultural elite. Case in point, April 29, 1874. Claude Monet and friends launched the School of Impressionism, which is really big stuff. You could think of it as a new platform, an ecosystem. And man, in retrospect, it was up there with iTunes. And like iTunes, Impressionism had reviews, like dirty 3/4 of the canvas with black and white, rub the rest with yellow, daub in blue and red daubs, and you have an impression of spring before which the initiates will swoon in ecstasy. smear a bit of that, and the enlightened visionaries explain, isn't that a perfect impression of the Bois de Madone? So it turns out that this theme of bringing art and technology together always seems to rub people in an interesting way. Here was the first exhibit of computer art, 1968, Cybernetic Serendipity. The establishment freaked. The establishment freaked a lot in 1968. Here's some of what they said. The winking lights, the flickering television screens, the squabs from the music machines are signaling an end to abstract art. When machines can do it, is it worth doing? Well, it was against this background that a number of us came together and formed GAFTA, because we wanted to create a space for artists and technologists to come together. And what's exciting is you see people working in code who come from the art community, the finance community, the technical community. Our space is in the Tenderloin. It used to be what they called an art theater. It was a porn theater. They called it an art theater. It's now an art organization again. And our first show, which we called Open, it turns out maps had a significant role. We worked with Eric Rodenbach and Stamen Design because it turns out our neighborhood is one of the highest crime areas, and it's an area that's willfully trying to change. So we started to use mapping, in this case showing information about rents, about crime, and the neighborhood to get a dialogue going. This, for example, shows crime in the neighborhood. I was worried. I thought, oh my God, if we show the world there's all this crime here, the neighbors will get angry at us. They'll think that we're being, annoying or elitist or something. But in fact, it created a common ground, a conversation about all of this. One of the first works that we actually have released as an institution is a piece called Tenderloin Dynamic that we did with Stamen Design. So here people actually can go in and take a look at data. For example, this is rent information around town. You can see the fancy parts of town or not. But then you can also take a look and run that against crime information in San Francisco and get a sense for where the crimes are and where the problems are. You can even then take a look at building permits and seeing what parts of town will grow. So here the map's being used as a way to explore and common ground. And in a kind of a delighted fashion, when we started doing this, the police showed up and they're like, look, people care about our data. It became a place where they would say, look, we made arrests there and now the community cares. So we were really interested to see that this created a common ground. We've been doing a lot of work with Asaf Bitterman and Colorado at the Sensible Cities Lab at MIT. This is an organization that understands that all sorts of data that flies out of our cities can be used to understand it and manage it better. In fact, tomorrow's panel that Esther Dyson's doing on the Internet of Things has a real intersection with what we're doing here. Here's a project that Sensible Cities did where they tagged trash. They actually put data on trash as it moved around, and you can see this piece of trash leaving Seattle and moving around 48 miles as that piece of plastic finally came to a resting place. It turns out that upon more recent analysis, recycling material that left Seattle went all the way to Chicago before it got sent to LA for recycling, asking the question, are we really doing a big favor to the environment? This is the kind of data that comes out and people can interpret when you can suddenly see things. Another project that MIT has been doing, and by the way, we'll be doing a retrospective on their work at GAFTA in the spring, so we've been spending a lot of time with them. I worked with them on the introduction of this, the Copenhagen Wheel. Turns any bicycle into a hybrid bike, and they announced it, a fabulous project at the climate conference recently. But in addition to it being a hybrid, it turns out this takes climate data or pollution data and broadcasts it from all over town. So here you can take a look at live data of a bicycle moving through a city giving pollution information. Now, by comparison, there are 3 pollution monitoring stations in Copenhagen. 3, capital cost. But if every bicycle moving around emits data, you suddenly get an awful lot of data that citizens are providing for free. In this case, information about pollution, but also social network data and traffic data. So there's this crowdsourcing phenomenon as people come together and create data as a byproduct of what they're doing. And then it can be analyzed. But we realized that the map is actually a spatial metaphor for a number of things. The second software project that we created is an open source music collaboration piece. We realized if we're about art in the digital age, there's probably a lot of collaborators. It opens. We adopt a lot of the values that we talk about in the tech community. So this is a piece called Sequence. In this piece, anybody can create one of these organisms and throw it into this world, and they can interact with each other. Because it's a virtual world, naturally the interface kind of looks like a map. This is the device that's used to actually create that creature. It's a little synthesizer. You get to create these things, you throw them out, and then in a social network, they go out and they share. So once again, a spatial metaphor for a piece of art that's actually designed as a collaborative piece among our audience and an opportunity to learn. This was created by Brian Alexander, Gabriel Dunn, and several people at the organization, and it's fun to see that collaboration go on. But these map analogies go beyond just the world of high art. My friend Michelle Azar, Michelle, are you in the audience? Michelle from Best Buy, she had to do the 8th grade quilt for her daughter's class. And it turns out that she took data, social network data, about how each kid expressed themselves and turned it into essentially a tag cloud or a quilt. Here you can see what people are saying about themselves. And what's interesting about this is we see so much of this stuff on screen that we now have, you can see lots of people using these new metaphors. And in this case, it showed up as a quilt. You know, yesterday, Helen Fletcher gave us insight into love and how we seem to be hardwired at the cellular level for emotions programmed for love. Well, it turns out a similar thing is true about place. We have place sales. We're hardwired to recognize place. And these are also evoked by maps. And I think this may be one of the reasons that the map has such a unique place in art and commerce, in practicality and storytelling, and the reason that in this world of rapid emerging data, the map has a special place as we really begin to interpret things and use them differently. Here's another example of a place cell. So enjoy all of the digital art that we've put up. And for those of us on the more digital side of this spectrum, we're thrilled to participate and explore how the map is an important device. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Peter Hirschberg. Many, many thanks. I've got now the great pleasure to introduce Alexander Kluge, our next speaker. Alexander Kluge has many parallel realities. He's a filmmaker, a TV producer, a very prolific author. He was legal advisor at the Frankfurter Institute for Sozialforschung and a close trustee of Theodor Adorno. He's done many, many legendary films. Important part of European film history of the last 4 or 5 decades. In 1987, Alexander Kluge established DCTP, his own platform for independent programs in private German television, has then gone online, and that's his latest project, www.dctp.tv. He's written many books recently. Das Labyrinth der zärtlichen Kraft is the most recent book. And it's a miracle Alexander Kluge is here today. We've collaborated actually on many projects over the last 10 years, very often on 1-minute clips, which he made for several of my exhibitions. And he always said when I invited him to something that he's very happy to participate as long as I don't make him leave his studio because he's too busy making new films. So it's really a miracle he's here with us today. Thank you so much. Welcome to Alexander Kluge.
Ich darf Ihnen meine Übersetzerin vorstellen, Frau Horn.
I'm going to interpret for Mr. Kluge.
Lauter sprechen. Ich war sehr überrascht, als ich von Hans-Ulrich Obrist hörte, dass wir hier über Maps sprechen.
I was very surprised when I heard from Hans Ulrich that we were going to be talking about maps today.
Ich mache Filme, ich mache nicht Landkarten.
I make films, I don't make maps.
Aber ich habe das Thema liebgewonnen inzwischen.
But I've grown very fond of this topic.
Landkarten sind Erzählungen.
Maps are stories.
Und sie enthalten Orientierung.
And they contain orientation.
Bei Immanuel Kant heißt ein wichtiges Buch, sich im Denken orientieren.
Immanuel Kant wrote an important book called Orientation in Thinking.
Und da fängt er ganz einfach an zu sagen, ich kann rechts und links unterscheiden und kenne den Aufgang und den Untergang der Sonne.
And he starts very simply by saying, I can distinguish between the left and the right, and I can see the rising and the setting of the sun.
Und alles, was man nicht auf diese sinnliche Frage zurückführen kann, ist unvorsichtiges Denken.
And anything that can't be reduced to these factors is thinking that is a bit dangerous.
Und er kommt dann auf die Thesen der Aufklärung.
And then he comes to the theses of enlightenment.
Und sagt, diesen Mut zu haben, ja, zu unterscheiden, den Mut zu haben, sich zu orientieren. Das ist der wesentliche Punkt.
And he says to have the courage of discrimination, to have the courage of distinction and the courage to find orientation.
Im Labyrinth und außerhalb.
Within the labyrinth and outside of the labyrinth.
Die Geographen des Aristoteles, die liefen hinter den Armeen Alexanders des Großen her und hatten ein Gerät hinter sich.
The armies of the geographers of Aristoteles ran behind the armies and had a device which they trailed behind them.
Und Meile für Meile maßen sie die Entfernung zum Indus oder zum Nil mit ihren Füßen.
And mile per mile they measured the distance to the Indus or to the Nile with their feet.
Das ist sinnliche Gewissheit.
That is essential certainty.
Und darauf wurden die ersten Karten gegründet.
And that was the basis of the first maps.
Dann haben wir viele hundert Jahre später Karten, die dienen dazu, andere Kontinente, Kolonien zu besetzen.
And then we've got lots of maps which served to occupy other continents, other colonies.
Wenn man die Erde erstmal kartografiert hat,
once you've cartographed the earth,
hat man sie auch erobert.
You've actually conquered it.
Und noch später, also das ist ja schon in der Zeit, die meine Eltern kannten oder die ich selbst vielleicht auch noch kannte, das sind die Landkarten der 10er, 20er, 30er Jahre des 20. Jahrhunderts.
And even later, and these are the times that my parents knew, that I even knew, these are the maps of the 20s and 30s of the last century.
Da sieht man ungeheure Mengen rosa Farbe.
Here you see lots of pink.
Und das ist englische Besitzung, das ist British Empire.
And they reflected the British Empire.
Dann gibt es etwas Violett, das ist das große französische Empire.
And then you've got a little purple, and that is the big French Empire.
Dann haben wir große Massen an grünem Russland.
And then we've got huge masses of green in Russia.
Und ganz klein mit Hut die Mittelmächte.
And very, very small with hat, you've got the medium
powers. Im Ersten Weltkrieg auch verloren.
Who lost the First World War.
Heute ist diese Welt verschwunden.
And today this world has disappeared.
Sie ist vielleicht noch subjektiv in den Menschen vorhanden, aber nicht objektiv.
It may still exist subjectively in the people, but it doesn't exist objectively.
Und heute ist jeder fingerbreit Erdboden durch GPS ermittelt.
And today every inch of ground has been located by a GPS.
Es ist kaum ein Fuchsloch oder ein Partisanenversteck unentdeckt.
Hardly any fox's burrow cannot be located, or the hiding place of a guerrilla warrior.
Und das sagt mir, dass wir Landkarten zusätzlich zu GPS eigentlich nicht brauchen. Wir brauchen eine Batterie für das Gerät, das GPS empfängt.
So basically that means we don't need maps in addition to the GPS. We just need a battery which powers the GPS.
Aber wir brauchen etwas ganz anderes. Wir brauchen Landkarten, Kartierung der subjektiven Seite im Menschen.
But we need something completely different. We need maps which cartograph the subjective senses of the human being.
Im 17. Jahrhundert gab es eine Mode Landkarten der Liebe.
In the 17th century there was a fashion called maps of love.
Da gibt es also die Abgründe der Liebe, genau verzeichnet.
Here you can find the abysses of love, very clearly mapped out.
Man sagt, mit der mit einer Straßenkarte von Groß-London den Harz durchwandern.
And one talks about using a map of Greater London to travel through the Harz, which is a very rugged mountain range in the center
wo sich schon Goethe
of
verirrt
Germany,
hat.
where already Goethe lost his way.
Und dieses Cross-Mapping, ja, dass man wirkliche Verhältnisse mit der subjektiven Seite, mit dem Zwerchfell, dem Herzen oder eben der Vorgeschichte eines Menschen liest.
So these maps, by means of which you can see the subjective side of a human being via the solar plexus, via the heart, these are the maps required.
Das sind die Karten, die wir brauchen.
These are the maps that we require.
Und das ist wieder Erzählung, was ich vorhin sagte, Orientierung.
And that again is storytelling, as I mentioned earlier on, or orientation.
Aber wenn jetzt etwas Menschen beleidigt und erniedrigt als etwas Objektives,
but if something offends or humiliates human beings, something that is objective,
dann antworten Menschen mit dem Antirealismus des Gefühls.
then people respond with the anti-realism of emotion.
Eine Wirklichkeit, die mich verletzt, leugne ich.
A reality that offends me, I deny.
Wir sind nämlich in Wirklichkeit keine Wahrheitssucher.
Because in reality we don't seek truth.
Und deswegen auch keine korrekten Landvermesser.
And that is why we don't measure landscapes correctly either.
Wir sind illusionsfähig.
We like to have illusions.
Wir leisten Widerstand.
We resist.
Jede unserer Hirnzellen, ja, ist ein Illusionist.
Every brain cell is an illusionist.
Ein Partisan, ja, der subjektiven Seite.
A partisan of the subjective side.
Nicht Notar der objektiven.
And not the notary of the objective side.
Und das führt dazu, dass Erzählungen nicht mehr linear funktionieren.
And that means that stories no longer work on a linear basis.
Was uns ja dieser Kongress hier genauso wie das Internet auch lehrt.
Which this Congress, just as the Internet, also teaches us.
Sehen Sie, ich habe mit großem Genuss mit Herrn Sasselow heute ein Gespräch geführt, unserem Astrophysiker, der ja gleich sprechen wird.
I had a very interesting conversation with Mr. Zastov, who's our astronomer or astrophysicist, who's going to be talking later
Und er
as
macht
well.
Sternenkarten.
And he draws maps of the stars.
Und es gibt im 19. Jahrhundert, ganz benachbart zu dem, was vorhin zu sehen war mit den frühen Fotografien, einen Mann, Granville, der hat gemalt die Planetenbrücke.
And in the 19th century, there was a man called Granville, similar to what you saw earlier, who drew a bridge to the stars.
Und das ist aus Eisen gebaut, so wie die Brücken in Paris oder der Eiffelturm gebaut ist. Eine Brücke, die von der Erde zum Saturn reicht.
And this is a bridge that reaches from Earth to Saturn and is built similar to what you would see in the Eiffel Tower or iron bridges in Paris.
So denken Ingenieure.
That is how engineers think.
Diese Brücke würde aber in Wirklichkeit, da der Saturn sich bewegt und die Erde sich bewegt, in jeder Sekunde zerreißen.
But since the Earth moves and Saturn moves, this bridge would collapse in a minute.
Wir brauchen also nicht-lineare Erzählung.
So we need non-linear stories.
Das heißt, so konstellative Erzählung unter sich bewegenden Körpern.
So we need constellative storytelling, storytelling in words that move.
Die Schwerkraft hält die Planeten zusammen und die Monde und die Planetoiden.
Gravity keeps the Earth and the Sun and the moons together.
Und es ist eine herrliche Vielfalt, wenn Galilei, ja, die Jupitermonde betrachtet.
And you have wonderful diversity when Galileo looked at the Jupiter moons.
Und unser ganzes Sonnensystem, das sich umeinander bewegt sich nochmal 250 Millionen Jahre um das Zentrum der Milchstraße herum.
And our solar system, which moves within itself, moves around the Milky Way in 250 million years.
Das nennen die Astronomen die große Revolution.
And astronomers call this the big revolution.
Und mich entzückt es als Landkartenmaler, dass die Dinosaurier gewissermaßen das Zentrum der Milchstraße von der anderen Seite gesehen haben.
And I'm enchanted by the idea
Wir
that
können ihnen direkt in die Augen gucken.
dinosaurs saw the Milky Way from the other side. We can actually look directly into their eyes.
Konstellatives Denken, Konstellationen bedeuten, dass wir so etwas wie hier diesen Kongress oder uns alle hier, die wir herumlaufen als lebende Landkarten, ernst nehmen, dass wir in Bewegung sind, voneinander verschieden sind, dass der Satz vom ausgeschlossenen Dritten nicht gilt. Sorry.
Constellative thinking means, as we can see in this Congress as well, that all of us are connected, that
Also, we all are connected, which other than all we are living maps, of course.
and we're all living maps,
Unser
moving
Gesicht,
maps.
Christophs Gesicht, ja.
Our faces, Christoph's face.
Aber die Geschichte, die er mit sich herumträgt den ganzen Tag, Der war mal ein Kind von 6 Jahren. Ja,
But the
nicht?
story that he carries around with himself all day, he used to be a child,
Ich
6
wünsche ihm
years
90.
old,
Ja?
and I hope he'll turn
Das ist eine Menge
90.
Tage.
And that contains many days.
Und das ist eine Währung, die Währung unserer Lebenstage, die ganz anders funktioniert als die des Geldes.
And that is the currency of our living days, which works completely differently to normal currency.
Und ich habe hier auf dem Kongress gelernt, dass diese Währung, ich gebe meine Aufmerksamkeit gegen die Aufmerksamkeit anderer, ich gebe meine Tage gegen die Tage anderer, dass das der eigentliche Tauschverkehr ist im Internet.
And this currency, which we can see here, I give my attention in exchange for the attention of somebody else. I give my time in exchange for the time of somebody else. That is the actual barter that is happening here.
Ich habe Ihnen da ein Bild vorzuschlagen, das zeigt die Gärten der Information, von denen ich schwärme.
Here you can see an image which I love, which is called the Garden of Information.
Der Leitsatz des Ganzen heißt, erlöst die Tatsachen von der menschlichen Gleichgültigkeit.
And the leading motto is, deliver the facts from human indifference.
Eine Nachricht ohne subjektive Antwort gibt es gar nicht.
News or a message without a subjective response doesn't exist.
Nur Fernsehdirektoren denken, dass es so etwas gibt.
Only television directors think that something like that exists.
Der Kosmos, die Liebesfähigkeit, die Tatsache, Liebe ist keine Einbahnstraße, das sind alles Bilder, Karten.
The cosmos, the ability to love, the fact that love is not a one-way road, these are all maps, these are all facts.
Genau. Und das, was auf den Bildern, auf den Karten zu sehen ist, lebt. Und mich hat sehr entzückt, dass in diesem Projekt Sense-Able Cities.
And what is on these projects is alive, and I was very much fascinated by the sensible cities.
In Boston Karten vorgeschlagen werden in Echtzeit, die lebendig sind.
Maps are proposed in real time that are alive.
Herr Scharmacher hat heute mir ins Mikrofon eine sehr schöne Geschichte erzählt.
Mr. Scharmacher told me a very nice story today when I interviewed him.
Zu Silvester 1800 sitzen Goethe und Schiller zusammen.
On New Year's Eve in 1800, Goethe and Schiller are sitting together.
Sie prüfen die Qualität des 19. Jahrhunderts, was jetzt kommt auf sie als Zukunft.
They're examining the quality of the 19th century, the future that is now approaching them.
Und der Friedrich Schiller, der Dramatiker, sagt Schirmacher, hat tatsächlich vor sich eine Karte des Mondes und guckt dabei den Mond an.
And Schiller, so Schirmacher says, actually has a map of the moon in front of him and at the same time is looking at the moon.
Er hätte die lateinischen Namen, die Täler und die Landschaften des Mondes haben, ja, auf dem Gestirn nicht sehen können.
He couldn't have seen the Latin names that the valleys and the depths of the moon have. He couldn't have seen that on the actual moon.
Aber das Licht des Mondes reicht aus, dass er Karten lesen kann.
But
ja?
the light of the moon is sufficient for him to be able to read the map.
Und es ist enorm, wie sich das zueinander bewegt.
And it's amazing how that approaches each
Während er
other.
noch guckt hier zu Silvester, ja, geht nicht nur Zeit vorüber, sondern der Mond ist schon ganz woanders.
And while he is looking at the map on New Year's Eve, the moon is already in a completely different position. It has already moved on.
Wir haben begrenzte Redezeit. Ich wünsche Ihnen noch viel Glück hier auf der Konferenz.
And we only have a limited time, and I wish you a lot of happiness here.
Thank you so much, Alexander Kluge. I've got another great pleasure to introduce our next guest. Very warm welcome for Eric Rodenbeck. Eric is Themen's founder and creative director. He's a pioneer in the design field, has worked actually to extend boundaries of online media and live information visualization. When we spoke earlier today with Eric about his maps, he says his maps are always time-based. They are made by the world, by us, not by experts. They are dynamic, they are in real time, they are custom, they are not generic, and they're about exploration. A very, very warm welcome to Eric Rodenbeck.
Okay, so you can hear me okay? Ja, schönen guten Abend, meine Damen und Herren. I'm sort of German by association. My parents are German, so it's always fun to come in und mein Deutsch ein bisschen zu üben. So vielen Dank. I want to talk today about exuberant cartography. There's a sort of explosion of map-related activity that's going on in the world, and we're seeing it sort of grow all the time. And I've identified a few characteristics of some of the work that we and some others have been doing, and I think that we can only expect those to increase over the coming years. So the first tendency is that maps are very quickly becoming about more than geography. Yeah, is that better? Is that better? Hello? Yeah, okay, good. That they are about more than geography. We're seeing, essentially, you can see this all over the place, but additional layers being put onto maps. But what I mean by this is that they're increasingly about, they have a time dimension to them. This is a map of all of the houses in San Francisco, animated according to the date that they were built. And so you can start to see in the 1840s, after the gold rush, a little blooming, and then there's a post-war boom, and you can see the neighborhoods kind of growing and flowing like algae almost. I think this is something we're going to see a lot more of. I also think we're going to start to get a situation where the maps are not just geographic. We're starting to see, sometimes we say about our work at Stamen that some of the maps, everything is a data visualization, but some of them are geographic and some of them are not. And what we've done in a project for the San Francisco MoMA is to make a non-geographic map. And if you think about the way that Google Maps works, when you're dragging them and sliding them, it's all broken up into tiles, and you have these kind of infinite tile sets. What you can do is take those tile sets and have them not just be about geography, but have them be about modern art. And so this is a project that we put together for the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, and it's essentially a Google map for their whole collection. And the idea is that you can drag and pan and zoom and pay attention to artworks, not just according to kind of linear systems, but also you get these kind of nonlinear associations that are using mapping metaphors. Another thing that I think we're going to start to see very quickly, very much more, is that maps are increasingly not going to be made by experts. They're going to be made by us, by our activity and by the activity of people around us. We have been designing maps for a company called CloudMade that uses data from the OpenStreetMap project, which is a project that's designed, it's essentially Wikipedia for maps, and these maps are being edited in real time and being edited all around the world by a team of volunteers, and they have the same kind of structures as Wikipedia does. And so what we've been making are maps that are using this data for things that are not just the driving directions. So this is one of the first maps we put together of Amsterdam. It's kind of looks like a regular map of driving directions, but what you can also do is start to have maps that are perhaps more about biking, maps that are a little bit more restrained, and then you could also have maybe maps that are more like a Jason Bourne novel, or if you want to make a spy movie, you can have your maps look like that. One of the great benefits of the project is if you take a look at what Google Maps has as a map for Baghdad, it looks like this, but the OpenStreetMap community has this much detail about Baghdad, and they're not as constrained by things like copyright protection, and so you can essentially have armies of volunteers kind of all out there drawing maps for themselves, and then we can use them for free. The mechanism by which you get those maps in there looks something like this. There's some, you can print out a map that doesn't have a lot of detail on it, go there and walk around and make drawings on it, scan it back into the computer, and then suddenly you have a map that we can all use. This is currently being used in Haiti, where the OpenStreetMap community has been doing things like analyzing satellite photographs like this and marking on them where all the refugee camps are. So this is something that's kind of happening more and more, and it means that we don't have to wait for the Googles and the Navtex and all those companies to update the maps. We can do that. We can do it on our own. I think also increasingly maps are going to become more porous and dynamic. There's a project that we've been working on with two cities in the city of Oakland and the city of San Francisco, and this is a crime map. This map is updated every day as the police report their crimes. There's the ability to kind of slide around and sort of do all the things that you'd expect from a normal map, except that there's this kind of time-based ongoing thing where you can analyze crime patterns. You start to see really interesting patterns emerge. This is a map of prostitution arrests in Oakland, and if you animate this over time, you can basically see that the cops start down at the one end and they just drive up the street arresting people as they go, and they do that about once a month. and then they don't do anything. So this kind of ability for a map to kind of just show you, it's not like we designed the map to show exactly that, but we designed a map to kind of make surprises possible. And the map has, the ability to send that information out. And so there's email, there's RSS feeds, and all kinds of things. And the map also starts to do things like be able to not just show dots on a map. There's a sort of joke around the office that Google Maps is, for all that they're really great, you have this kind of red dot fever where you just throw a bunch of pimples all over the map and every map looks the same. So what we start to be able to do is to make maps like this that show crime in Oakland, but show have essentially a different view so that a map of crime doesn't look like a map of birthday parties or of pizza joints. And this is a way that works. I think we're also going to start to see that these maps are going to become a lot more real-time and participatory. Maps are going to be not something that sort of gets done once a week or once a year, but it's something that's happening in absolute real-time. We've been working with MTV and Twitter for the last few months to do visualizations of Twitter activity around television events. So the first one that we put together was around the MTV Music Awards earlier there, towards the end of last year. And each one of the circles there is one of the performers, and they're sized according to how much Twitter activity is around them. And this is happening in real time while the television is going. So you start to see, this is a visualization of the Kanye West moment. Maybe you didn't see it here, but Taylor Swift was on stage accepting her award, and Kanye West basically interrupted her. And you could see really in real time what people thought about Kanye West and what he had done. These maps are on TV. That was a reference to the word asshole, in case that wasn't clear. The maps are on television, and so they're very sort of live and engaging and dynamic. We put together one just this last Friday about the MTV telethon for Haiti. And this is a live visualization that mapped the responses that people were having around the world to the Haiti telethon. And so in real time, you started to see that, that different people around the world were saying different stuff. The maps are also getting to a point where they are custom branded, where we're not going to see this kind of generic, regular map that everybody is using on their sites. This is a project that we put together for the London Olympics that's going to be in 2012, and they are not able to use free maps because, for branding reasons, basically. They get paid a lot of money to put your logo on there. And so what we've done is put together a kind of custom cartographic project for them that essentially brands the whole of the UK with their colors. And so we start to be able to do custom things and show the Olympic Park in the middle of the city. We start to be able to do things like show webcams, start to show the difference between where the park is and where it's not, and get really sort of custom and specific with the applications. And so the last thing I want to talk to you about is something that's kind of I feel is the kind of most interesting thing that's going to start to happen and is starting to happen, is this idea that maps are not just about search, but that they're becoming increasingly about exploration. And that you can use the map as a way to not just kind of look for something and find it, but to be able to explore a data set and learn from it. And so this is a project that we put together with a UK charity called My Society. And what it does is it maps the amount of time that it takes you to travel from a given location via public transit. And so as that circle is expanding, the amount of time is changing. And so what you can get there is this kind of, you see this kind of map of a kind of contour line of how long it's going to take you to get to this place, say if you work there. And there's a slider that you can then use to drag that back and forth. And if you take that information and you combine it with housing prices, you can do a similar kind of map of not just how long it takes to get someplace, but a map of how expensive it is to be there. And you can start to come to where, I know that I want to spend between $200,000 and $300,000 pounds, I should say, on a house, and I want to live somewhere about an hour and a half away. And you can start to refine these maps and kind of really get in there and not have to sort of type in, I want to live here and I want to live there, but you can kind of use the map to kind of winnow down, and you can say, well, maybe I want to live a little closer and spend a little bit more money, or maybe I want to spend a little bit less money and have a little bit of a longer commute. And I think that's all the time I have, so thank you very much for inviting me here. Grüß Gott.
Thank you so very much, Eric. I've got now the great pleasure to introduce Qiu Zijie, our next speaker, who was born in Zhangzhou in China and actually graduated from the Hangzhou Academy, where he also is a professor today and a great pioneer of education, art education in China. His work has been shown in many group shows, solo shows at PS1, more recently at the Haus der Kulturen der Welt in Berlin, and in a big solo show at the Ullens Center for the Arts in Beijing. We can say that maps are an umbilical cord in his work, because he's used map ever since the beginning, more recently in many extraordinary drawings. A very, very warm welcome to Qiu Zijie.
You can switch the slides with this, or if it doesn't work, just say next.
You mean plus this to chance?
Okay. Well, it's working separate. Just you can switch it back to the
Okay. Okay, first I have to apologize for my broken English, and then let's start. Earlier September last year, I saw this installation in Fukuoka Asian Art Triennial, which the theme of the triennial is Life and Dead Life. And this installation includes this wooden sculpture in the middle and a series of Tanka style, like Tibetan traditional style Tanka painting. And the title is The Water Saving the Nation, or maybe we said National Saving Waters. This work is based on that famous book published in China in 2005, written by this old man, which is now almost 90 years old. His name is Guo Kai. And Mr. Guo got his genius or maybe crazy idea during the 30 years before, during the Cultural Revolution, when he was a prisoner at that time. And this book is his proposal to build a huge water control engineering project to give water to Beijing, to the northern China city like Beijing. After a long time research of the Chinese water system, Mr. Guo realized that in China, this Yaluzhangbu River in Tibet, which is rich of water, almost 10 times than the Huanghe River, or we said the Yellow River in northern China. So, and also this Yaluzhangbu River was the upriver of the Ganges in India, which brings flood to India and Bengal every year during the rain seasons. So Mr. Guo suggests to build big dam on the Yaluzhangbu River, and then he can keep part of the water, build a channel, dig it to the Nujiang River, which was the upriver of the Salween River in Burma, and then build a dam again, and put the water to the Lancangjiang River, which was the upriver of Mekong in Laos and Vietnam, and then again to Yangtze River, again to Yellow River, and again to Beijing. If we consider about the altitude, we will find that all that river, the Tibetan river, the Yaluzhangbu River, is the highest one, and then each one is higher than the next one. So physically, it's possible, this project. So he can put the water to Beijing, and then even put it to Xinjiang, and even to Afghanistan. So it have a great title called The Channel Between Europe and Asia. So that's his idea. And then I make this map, like with the little dams and the floating waters in the middle. It's a wooden sculpture and represents his idea. And also it is a eyes of the crying Buddha. Again, then I imagine the future if people really build this project. And on this side is the good future. On the other side, on the other wall will be the bad future. For example, in this picture, in this drawing, when people build a dam, and the water saved the thirsty dragon in the picture. And also, the Tibetan people became rich because of the power station. But the dry one, we saw the bad future, like there's a war between India and China. And the India god, the Shiva, is holding a mushroom cloud in his hand and with a tiger under his foot, as well as the Chinese guy with elephants under the foot. And this shows, the left one shows the beautiful future that the Chinese government will have India to control the flood and also giving the water to Afghanistan. But the dry one, we saw the terrible weather comes and the snow lines rising up. And of course, all the animals lost their home and thousands of immigrants. This is both bad one. This one shows the dam became the goals of the international terrorists, and that one shows the goal caused the terrible earthquake. So these events also became one of the details on my map I make for DLD this time. And we can see there's a China-India War historical site. Besides, it's the United States and Mexico War historical site. That's my imagination. So this is the map. And when I think about the future, I choose 5 elements as the place of my imagination, which is art and culture, economy, political, energy, and sciences and technology. So I can put every year's events on it. For example, in the year of 2009, we have H1N1 flu, and then we had the G20, we had Michael Jackson, and then in the year of 2010, then we will have things like, we don't know now, but for the future, we are not totally unknown. We still have some certain points. For example, like in the year of 2025, the Chinese population will be 1.5 billion, and the India population will be over China, become the biggest population in the world. And that is based on the research. We can, it's quite certain. And in the year of 2033, Chinese population will tend to negative group. So based on this and also my imagination, then I got the image of this bridge crossing over the sea of uncertainty. Okay, so I made this 3D map with the same idea. And here we have the 5 elements became 5 avenues, which is it seems like Manhattan, right? But also like Beijing. And we have the political avenue, we have the art and culture avenue, we have the economy avenue, and the energy avenue, and the technology avenue. And here in the middle we can see the Google Hotel and Google Airline. And this is in 2015 Street, we got the tomb of Stephen Hawking. And of course, we know this year Apple will have their e-book reader, right? So this is Google Hotel, and this is the forum between Japan, Korea, and China. And here we have the monument of world population reaching 6.5 billion. And we had a Hollywood disaster movie studio. And the presents for the Somali pageant. and the tomb of Michael Jackson of this year. And the monument of President Obama and the portrait in Tiananmen Square and the Copenhagen meeting. And here we got the Wall Street Heritage Park. And then when I realized we need to print the 2D post, so I moved it to paper. I draw this 2D map, the same idea. And here, because of the world temperature, the global warming, so we can sort the Venice. We have the Venice overwhelmed monuments. So hence we will no longer have Venice banana in the future. And here we got the Museum of Auto Time and the first store, and then in the new UN, the first store and the climatology apartment will become the most important two apartments. And we had a transgene good. Okay, then here we got when we passing through the new Cold War bridge. The new Cold War will be between different kinds of countries. Some countries support losing population control and gain intervention, and the other one is against that. Then here we come to the island of 2100 island. Then we come to the square of globalization. So this is my map. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much. Many, many thanks to QZA. Many thanks to QZA. I've now got the great pleasure to introduce our next guest, Philippe Areno, who works actually between fiction and reality. We've got a mobile phone here ringing. And an umbilical cord is at all of Philippe's projects in a very diverse range of media, including sculpture, drawing, film, and performance, always have to do with production of reality. Philippe's recent exhibition include a whole series of shows at the Irish Museum of Modern Art in Dublin, at the Centre Georges Pompidou in Paris, the Kunsthalle Zurich in Switzerland, as well as the Bar College near New York and the Serpentine Gallery in London. Philippe's recent project, which is still ongoing, is a whole trilogy of films. Zidane was the first one with Douglas Gordon. The Invisible Boy is the next one, which is now in the making, and it will be followed by a third film called Confession with Nicole Kidman. A very warm welcome to Philippe Areno.
So I don't have any pictures to show you really, but this is just like some notes I took. Thank you. And but there's one picture that I like to start and finish with, which is a drawing I did to answer the invitation of Hans. So I didn't really know what to do or to draw when I was asked to think about map or mapping. So what I did is that I drew the skin of a cuttlefish, because I like this animal a lot. Cuttlefish are like cephalopods in the same group, and so like squid or octopus. And the reason why I like them is because the skin contains chromatophores, that is colored pigments. So their color can change in a millisecond to adapt their surrounding. They change colors to communicate. And that's what my friend Jaron Lanier said about them. He defined them, that way of communicating, as a post-symbolic form of communication. That is to say that in order to say crab or algae, cuttlefish can become an algae or a crab. But while drawing this creature, I was also thinking that chromatophores also, and maybe mainly, provide those creatures camouflage with their background, allowing them to disguise shadows from any predators by glowing. When chromatophores glows on their skin, the shadow of the cuttlefish get to be erased on the sand, so predators can't notice their presence. So they become, in other words, invisible. And I would like to talk about mapping and invisibility. I like to talk about transparencies forms rather than communication forms. And so I would like to take us out a bit of this photologic system of thinking in which we are. As Derrida wrote, we can define photologic as a system that annihilates force and duration for the illusion of the simultaneous and the form. So this obsession to mistake seeing with understanding, because at the end we all say, I see, in order to say I understand. To say differently, what is real is not necessarily what is visible. So you must remember, I think, all the opening scene of the Chien Andalous, the Andalusian dog from Luis Buñuel, when the scene opened on the close-up of a shot where Buñuel cut the eye of the character. This is not a statement, really, just some ideas I wrote. I'm not like, I try to be serious, but it's not so serious. So I guess there's a kind of a paradox when an artist talks about invisibility, but I think maps concern invisible ideas. I think a map is something between a painting and or can we say it like that? No, between a painting and a photography. Like it's not a recording of the real, it's not also the fantasy of it. It's something between both. And so mapping, in a way, we can also define it as a process of creation where things are not created, but where a frame, a map, can allow something to happen. What we call that, we can call that a map, or musicians call it a score. The score allows an instrumentalist to rearrange, possibly, the music as it's playing it. And that was the 70s with Pierre Boulez's attempts. So, but this moment where a map can allow something to happen, we can call it that also an archive creation, a process of non-authoritarian creation, to track or trace particulars, to return authority from the artist as an author to things in the happening of their truth. To return toward things in the happening of their truth is also what Werner Herzog called the ecstatic truth. One of the first things that I did as an exhibition was to organize a demonstration in the schoolyard with kids shouting "No more reality." So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that there's no reality, really. It was an awareness that the condition of an image in the society in which we live is a complete commodification, is a branding of surfaces, a magic of community, as Karl Marx used to say. And I think I'm more concerned by what's not visible than what can be resolved through an image. I think that's the problem with Sony. I don't know much about map and mapping, but I know that being a topological metaphor that we use a lot with, during the conversation that we had with Hans. This idea that In the Search of the Lost Time can be seen as a great map, and novelists can be great map makers. Invisibility is the opposite of visibility. So it's a side in which the ideological space it is what has to remain visible. So it is what has to remain invisible so that the visible may be visible. In the same way, the excluded are, of course, visible in the precise sense that paradoxically the exclusion itself is a mode of the inclusion. Their proper place in the social body is that of exclusion. I'm working right now, that's why I want to end with that, on a film that Hans mentioned called Invisible Boy. So that's why I was making this note about invisibility, slightly boring note. But to say a few words about the film, which I'm not going to see because it's on the process of being made, it's a story of a little kid. He's 5 years old, and it's like a real story. It's a little Chinese illegal immigrant who lives in China, in Manhattan, in New York. And it supported this kid through 5 monsters who incarnate his paranoia, his stress, or his anxieties. And so I do consider now, by making this film and talking to this kid, designing those monsters or those creatures as a way, in a way, to use this paranoia of this kid to map New York. And so, yeah, that's it, really.
Thank you so very much to Philip. I've got the great pleasure now to introduce our next guest, Andri Sala. Andri Sala studied at the Albanian Academy of Arts in Tirana, attended the École Nationale des Arts Décoratifs in Paris, and studied film at Le Fresnoy. His videos, photography, and installation have been featured all over the world, in museums, from Paris to a recent museum tour in the United States, at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Miami, as well as the CCA in Cincinnati. And the current project is a commission for Art Angel in London. Actually, Andri will talk today about many different forms of mapping, a project actually to do with the weather, mapping of the weather, which is an installation he did in Paris, as well as the map he did here for DLD, which is a silhouette of Orson Welles, Mr. Al-Kadin. A very warm welcome to Andri Sala.
Sound.
Ages ago, in order to map a new land, explorers would sail around it and draw its outlines. Since we cannot sail along the coasts of the future, end of the projection. Please have the sound. Okay, maybe they want to send it from there?
Yeah.
But do they know that I want it every 7 seconds? Or 6?
Kannst du es von hinten starten, die Brise? There's an extended screen switched on, is it possible? Because he gets only a grey image?
No. No. Yeah, sure.
It's going to be fixed in a minute.
Every 6 seconds. All right. Let me. All right.
Oh yeah, Aaron knows what the problem is.
Yeah, okay. All right.
We start again, no?
Yeah.
We'll begin again with the beginning.
Is it working now?
Is it working? Yeah. Very warm welcome to Andri Sala.
Thank you. So, ages ago, in order to map a new land, explorers would sail around it and draw its outlines. Since we cannot sail along the coasts of the future, could we just build a bay, like a nest for the future, to come and lay in it? Such a bay would be an abstract frame that would function as a catching net for apprehending the future when it arrives, just like a butterfly. without destroying its wings in case it comes by air. The future would instantly become like a sort of objet trouvé, or more precisely, a found fresh situation. But there is a difference between what I call here the found future versus its historical sibling known as the found object. The found object comes with an already existing use and is linked to pre-existing purpose, while the found future would have no previous use and would exist only when it reaches the present at its own discretion, out of the reach of the special interests and the special fashions of the present. There will always be a future coming, but can we welcome the future the moment it arrives in such a way that would make it eloquent to us and yet encourage us to appreciate it without preconditions? What would be a nest, a frame, or a bay that can accommodate the future with its syntax without forcing on the future and on its syntax our terms of the world? In the recent years, I've been interested in work that does not end when it's finished, but rather starts when it's ready. Such a work is Why the Lion Roars, which is a weather-related work. It is composed of feature films that not only communicate on a visual and textual level, but also through a feeling for temperature. Each of the many films, 57, that I've selected, represent 1 degree of Celsius, from -11 to +45. A thermometer constantly measures the temperature outside the side of the projection and simultaneously edits the film program, continuously screening the film that corresponds to the actual outdoor temperature. What we are seeing is forecasts, daily forecasts of the program to come each day. At the exact moment of change in temperature, the film that represents the new degree is shown. As temperature fluctuates in the morning, then reaches stability later in the day, some films will be seen incomplete, while others are projected in the whole and even looped at times. Every season plays its own films. Each day offers a unique program. Back to my initial question of future and its syntax. In Why the Lion Roars, I've been interested in establishing a setting that would act like syntax for the future to come and articulate itself. Its content is daily changing under the spell of its syntax, in this case, the weather. When an increase or decrease in temperature occurs, one film follows the other, interrupting it and perhaps provoking unplanned collision of meanings. The syntax is playing with the content like in Chinese whispers. They are gently gossiping and influencing each other. If a map is a visual representation highlighting relationships between different elements in space, which qualities of the future should a map of the future highlight? Can we imagine maps that would enable us to perceive the future, just like the ancient sailors visualized from the outside the contours of the unknown, yet without colonizing the inside like their descendants did? And I'm offering you 2 minutes. Thank you.
And André, one can see this piece permanently in Paris, no? Whoever goes to Paris, maybe that's important to mention.
Yeah, and it's there for 5 years and it changes every day, depending on the weather, on the sites, the temperature in Paris.
So whoever is in Paris of you in the next 5 years, go to space 104. Is that the space in? Yeah. 104. Thank you so much, André. Got now the great pleasure to introduce our next guest, Julieta Aranda, who actually was born in Mexico and lives and works between New York and Berlin. In her practice, actually, there is an involvement with circulation mechanisms, politicized subjectivity, and always the perception and use of time. Julieta's work has been exhibited widely at the Guggenheim Museum in New York last year, at the New Museum at MoCA Miami, Witte de Witt, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago. And as she told me in a conversation we had yesterday, she's going to express her doubts about maps, something Carsten Höller said here last year at DLD is very important, doubts as a medium. Very warm welcome to Julieta Aranda.
Müsste da sein auf der Seite.
Okay. Coucou.
Yeah, we could do it.
Ah.
Okay, you can stop presentation.
Okay. Well, the invitation to come and talk about maps actually made me think a lot about my own relationship to space, because I have something that I would call spatial dyslexia, which means that I get constantly lost and cannot find my way between one place and another. This is actually so bad that even though I live in New York, which for the last 15 years, and this is a city that has been laid out as a grid, I still get lost in Manhattan. Not so long ago, a friend of mine gave me a GPS as a birthday present because he got tired of waiting for me at bars since I was getting lost. And it was nice for a couple of days, but then I realized that I hated the thing because it restored my sense of orientation at a heavy price. What happened is that the GPS started to determine my relationship to space in terms of speed and efficiency. And these are qualities that I don't like. Basically, the GPS took away my chances to get lost, and which I enjoy, and it somehow didn't seem worth it, so I ended up giving it back. What happens is then is that I realize that when I map my trajectories between point A and point B, I end up always choosing non-stationary landmarks. So the instructions I give to myself, instead of saying, okay, walk for 3 blocks and then turn left in East 7th Street, are more like, okay, I keep walking, and where there is a pigeon on the tree, I will make a left, and then I will continue walking until there are 5 men gathered on a street corner, and so on. What this does is that it creates effectively a one-way only map, a trajectory that cannot be retraced and that cannot be repeated. And this is actually the kind of map that I prefer. A little bit like the breadcrumb map that was made by Hansel and Gretel, I favor the idea of a map that disappears as fast as it is being written. Or better yet, an idea of the unmappable, indirect or errant trajectories that develop according to their own logic and that cannot be captured as data or as readable paths on a simulation of space or on a Cartesian plane. The maps that we use and make are a constant territorialization of space, a definition of reality in terms of the known. They generate sets of productive relationships, and when I say this, I mean productive in the worst possible sense of the word. The problem is that once those productive relationships become categorically defined as real, the tension and urgency to find another possibility for reality disappears and gets slack. Out of their very essence, maps are devices that outline power relationships and a kind of obligatory language. They lay out a disciplinary grid describing and accounting for all the complex rules that could be involved in any given operation. And then the use of the map becomes related to social situation and power structures. I was looking at the density of certain maps, not so much because I'm interested in what it is that they are mapping. I don't know what that's a map of. But more in terms of representation. And what this makes me feel is that there is very, very little elbow room in this proposition of space. I don't know what it is, but it feels productive in a very capitalistic sense, in the sense that it's producing a very predictable engagement. And if I have to think about a map for the future, what appears to me as urgent is to figure out how can a social body resist being reduced and inserted into this disciplinary grid? And how to somehow redistribute the situation enough so that all the dispersed black market-style activities and engagements that take place in the tension of the everyday can continue happening without being classified and entered into a system of checks and balances, and without throwing a dissecting light upon them. This desire to continuously carve the shape of the future seems to me to take up too much space, and ultimately, it also takes up a time that is not even ours. In a certain sense, this desire reminds me of an image coined by Jorge Luis Borges when he talks about exactitude in science in the book Fictions, and he mentions an empire where the art of cartography attains such perfection that the map of a single province occupied the entirety of a city, and the map of the empire, the entirety of a province. In time, those maps no longer satisfied, and the Cartographers Guild struck a map of the empire whose size was that of the empire, and which coincided point for point with it. The following generations, who were not so fond of the study of cartography as their forebears had been, saw that the vast map was useless, and not without some pitilessness, it was that they delivered it up to the inclemencies of the sun and the winters. In the deserts of the West, still today, there are tattered ruins of that map, inhabited by animals and beggars. In all the land, there is no other relic of the disciplines of geography. So, talking about maps for the future and so on, makes me think that we actually have quite a hierarchical relationship to time, and that we conform to an orderly flow of consequence in which we either aim towards realizing the dreams of the past, or else we articulate and propose utopias for the future, and therefore the present becomes a situation of infinite delay. So for a map of the future, I want to think that instead of infinite delay, the present can become a space of infinite action that is not contractually bound to what has been and to what there is to come, but that is rather a space of freedom, which then can become the only moment in which a utopia could be realized. So for a good map of the future, I want to go back to old navigation charts like this one, where the entirety of the world was not yet fully discovered. So portions of the globe were not yet closed land masses, but rather just a hint of a coastline and the possibility of land. And using that as a model, I updated a regular map of the globe into something that I think can be very useful for a map for everyday practices that doesn't try to capitalize so much on the relationships of time and space. There we go. That's my map.
Thank you so much, Julieta. Many thanks. Got now the great pleasure to introduce our next guest, Dimitar Saselov. Alexander Kluge already announced in a wonderful way Dimitar's work, so I'll just add a very few things. Mr. Saselov acquired his PhD in physics in Sofia, was then actually in Toronto with a PhD in astronomy, became the Alfred Sloan Fellow, and is currently also senior advisor for the Radcliffe Institute in Harvard. His research explores many different interactions between light and matter, and most recently his team has actually discovered many planets orbiting other stars with novel techniques. When we spoke earlier today, Dimitar said that he might show us today something like 93.5% of the universe. A very warm welcome to Dimitar Saselov.
And in the end, there comes the astronomer to map your future. So get ready. Well, we were charged as astronomers for millennia to map the sky, the night sky. And for all this time, we used to do it as a surface. The stars were up there, the constellations on a single surface, until we learned that actually there is depth at different distances. So then it became a 3D map. You could see that some stars were closer, others were farther away. And then we learned something very unexpected, which we didn't know about, and that was that all this world, our universe, is expanding. And as it is expanding, it's changing all the time. So then, thank you. Then it turned out that there is no map which is always the same. It changes all the time. But the main question here is, what is exactly that we are mapping? Are we mapping the stars, the planets, the galaxies? Well, we learned that even that's not necessarily true. What we learned relatively recently in the last 20 years is that the world is made of mostly something which we now call dark energy, which is something like a force, a field. So I'm not going to talk more about it because you can't map it. It's very weak, very, very weak, and it permeates the whole universe. But then there is the 28% of matter. 5% of that we call ordinary matter. We are made of it. Atoms, the planets, the stars, and the galaxies, everything that we see is made of that. And then there is 23% of something which we call dark matter. We know it's there. You will see we can even map it, but we don't see it. And so the question is, what do we actually map? Here it is. Just 3 weeks ago, the Hubble Space Telescope announced the new Hubble Deep Field in the meeting in Washington, D.C. So you see, all the way to 93% of the universe, observable universe. Galaxies, large and small, going further and further away from you. There is the depth effect, the three-dimensional map I was talking about. The bigger galaxies are closer to us, the smaller galaxies are farther away. There is also the other effect that it's ever-changing, that's encoded in the color. This is a multicolor visual map, so the color there reflects stars which are older and stars which are younger, red versus blue. But is this the map? There is something invisible here. There is an elephant in the room, in the image. A big, dark elephant that we can only touch and feel, but we don't see it. And that's the dark matter. And if you could look at that and see the dark matter, which we know how to do, but we can't see it, it will look like this. The dark matter looks completely different, not evenly distributed like the galaxies, like lonely islands in a sea of darkness. The dark matter is more like a web, or maybe more like the airplane patterns that Aaron showed, or maybe like the neurons in the brain that we saw earlier. But in any case, this is what the map of the universe that we live in looks like. It looks like this, not only like this. This, I thought, was what you would see if you go in a mountain at night, in a very, very dark night. The moon is not up, the stars are not visible, but there are chalets all over, and you see the lights. But you're lost. You can't really tell why some lights are above others. That's because you don't see the mountain. You don't see the peaks and the valleys. Only if you could somehow feel it, you will see this. And this is what is the current picture of the universe that we see. If you add the galaxies, it looks like this. And just as an aside, there is a young scientist who was with our group at Harvard 10 years ago, and he came back to Germany, Volker Springel, and he's starting now an institute here. He's from Munich. So, why am I talking to you about this? Maps in the 21st century. Let's come back to Earth. Why is it relevant to us right now? I think it is very relevant to us because the 21st century is a century which is a watershed in our human history. And the way it is a watershed is because it is showing us something which hasn't happened back in our history. Oh, that's not exactly what I wanted to show. Maybe I'll try my true and that doesn't seem to work either. Oh, I'll just push the button. Ah, okay. If it does, then. You see, what is happening in the 21st century is that there is a revolution which is in its beginning. And that revolution is our understanding of the basic chemistry of what we call life, the basic chemistry. Not us humans, not the plants and the animals, but the things which make up the most simple cells, the microbes, the viruses. And that revolution comes and happens in synergy with our ability to discover and study planets around other stars. It coincides. It all happens now. And that ability has reached a point at which we can actually combine the two. Just again, 3 weeks ago, I was in Washington for the same meeting, and there we announced the first results from a new space telescope which we call Kepler, after Johannes Kepler, which is built and is now working very well to detect, for the first time, planets like the Earth orbiting other stars. There is only one Earth in our solar system. But we hope, and we are almost certain now, that there are other Earths around other stars. And these telescopes will allow us to see them. And then we will be able to create a new map. That will be the map of life in the universe. And it is the 21st century when we, all of us, will have to learn how to build that new map. The new map, the future map of life in the cosmos as a whole, not just on our planet. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's wonderful. Thanks a lot. Thank you very, very much, Dimitar Saselov. Thank you all very much. And now, actually, it's a moment maybe to open it to the floor. If there are urgent questions, I mean, a lot of things will stay with us as questions. We will evolve them further in the book. The question of collaborative maps is very often with such panels, as we've done them with DLD and before the Academy of the Third Millennium before, is that actually triggers collaboration. So hopefully we'll see some collaborative maps of maybe some of the participants who met today. That would be my dream. We've also got lots of issues, I think, about how to map the unknown. Maps as production of reality, and maybe also the question of what is not a map. But are there urgent questions from you? We can open it. I see a question here.
Most of the maps we've talked about are a way of looking at different aspects of reality, in a way augmenting reality. But aren't we also moving to an age where the map is replacing the reality? I mean, I myself feel extremely awkward driving without a navigation system once I got one. I used to be able to use paper maps, and I find this extremely difficult these days, that I'm used to using a navigation system. With all these social apps around, for example, I think in not the too distant future, we might not dare to enter a restaurant that doesn't have any user Twitter feeds, whatever, on other opinions of what might be inside. We might be completely oblivious to shops that don't interface their pricing or their inventory to social apps that would alert us of offers they have. What do you think about that?
You know, Marshall McLuhan observed when he wrote Understanding Media that augmentation leads to amputation. That when you give someone a new capability, you get used to that. And he would talk about the motor car because you're in a car and you're kind of like a paraplegic with this machine around you. But boy, do I feel that way when I use augmented reality and I walk around the world like this. And I think the reliance on it and the degree to which we get in this feedback loop and depend on something is a really interesting factor today. And I would agree with that. I think it's a really interesting thing both to study and to think about how we keep a connection with the physical and the real world at the same time that we're all wrapped up in this stuff. And
anybody else wants to answer that? Okay, do we have other urgent questions for our panelists? If there are no questions, I know that some of our participants wrote down some maybe concluding remarks. So I don't know who would like to make final statements. I know the QZA have made lots of notes of questions. It's only just begun. This is a very short marathon. Usually we do them 24 hours. Here there is a question.
Yeah, I have a question from Weave magazine in Hamburg, and it's basically, if I maybe can take this one out, it's basically about the power of maps today. Do you think that has dramatically changed now that we have all those very publicly accessible applications like Google Maps, which are at the same time very centralized, organized? Has this, or do you think this leads to a sort of tremendous shift in the power that maps have today, also in a political sense?
Hear me? The front page of the New York Times, the day that Barack Obama got elected, was a map of the U.S. that was a pretty sophisticated analysis of kind of, you started to see which places went more Democratic and which countries went less Democratic, or sorry, more Republican and those kinds of things. And it was a very kind of sophisticated, nuanced thing. And for me, it marked this kind of watershed of kind of, the map is now front and center. It's really something that is, it's almost like you don't have a story if there isn't a map associated with it, and that kind of incredible proliferation. So I would definitely agree with you that, I mean, I was talking to Blaze from Microsoft a little while ago, and he was saying that the number of maps, the number of lookups of online, the number of lookups of online maps has increased like dramatically in the last, and you can peg it directly to the release of the iPhone. And people aren't really using this stuff as much on, I mean, I'm a little nervous actually because we haven't developed anything for the iPhone yet, but the number of maps that are sort of people are looking at in the actual world is just increasing like crazy. So I guess yes, and yes, right? I mean, it's sort of just, I can't imagine it even slowing down at this point.
There's a question here.
I'll ask one. There's a term.
Was there another question? No, so let's take
another one. Me?
Yeah, go ahead, and then we take the other question.
Sorry. So there's a term, the map is not the territory. You've probably heard of as well, too. And with these maps, it's having us look at things many ways. And in many ways, I think nearly all of these ways, they're kind of outer. We're projecting out at things. But there's also an inner landscape. And, if we talk about the territory of, looking at people's worldviews and, moving towards intuition and insight and these kind of things with this inner landscape. Do any of you have anything to say regarding to tools or methodologies for exploring that?
I was just pointing at Jonathan. We were talking about this at dinner last night.
Thanks. Well, I mean, the title of my talk yesterday was Inner Landscapes. But I think there are certain things you can map about people's insides. But anytime you aggregate something, you end up making generalizations because it takes the mean. And there's always individuals that defy those generalizations. So I think those kinds of maps that make conclusions about people in general are always going to have a certain superficiality to them because they won't apply to everybody. So I think it's important to supplement any kind of conclusions that are drawn from maps with direct anecdote, direct narrative, and direct experience that can add some more color and nuance to something that could otherwise be oversimplified in a kind of deceiving way. So I love maps, but I think that believing too much in maps is maybe a dangerous thing because it gives us the illusion that we control and understand everything when actually, this is why I loved, I'm not remembering your name, but was it Giulietta Aranda? Yeah, just this idea of bringing back uncertainty and the unknown into our lives, which have been so taken over by maps and knowing. So. I think that's one thing the inner landscape does real well.
I have a question here, unless somebody on our panel wants to answer the question before. Do we have? No? Yeah, 1 second. So we just continue and then we go.
Two things. The first is, from where I'm sitting, the fact that there are more maps doesn't mean that people are trusting them more. It means that in some ways they're trusting them less. And the more maps that are out there and the more visually literate and sophisticated we become as a result of exposure to all of these, the more uncertainty there is. In the sense that you're not just trusting. When I used to look at a map when I was a kid, before there were computer maps, I trusted that those were exactly what was there. And now I look at them, I'm a map maker, so I can question them. But I think also there's a sort of healthy skepticism that starts to come out. And the other thing I would say about that is you should take a look at an artist named Christian Knoll, who makes maps. He basically attaches a little pulse meter to people's fingers and has them, and a GPS, and he has them walk around the city and record their emotions. And so you get these kind of literally emotional landscapes of people walking around cities.
Anybody else on the panel wants to answer that? Or then we move on to the question here. Yeah.
I would just. Hello. I just observed that I think in the course of the marathon we've seen 3 different things interacting, and one is new abilities to sense things, One is new feedback loops, and one is new representations giving rise to interpretations. So, you can sense now socially, for example, you can have feedback to the city that affects crime. Those are less about the artistic interpretation, and that the exploration here is about given new senses. The question was asked of augmented reality. If we plugged some of these data feeds into our brain at birth, our brain would learn to add it to our consciousness somehow. It wouldn't seem like an unnatural sense. So I guess the question I would ask is, any thoughts on how we will learn to interpret reality more richly, or interpret our lives more richly, now that we have these additional feedback loops that we can represent in all the kinds of ways you've shown us?
Thank you. Who wants to answer that?
I was being trained as a traditional, quite traditional way of painter. And as a painter, I do believe actually every painting is a map. And I also believe the first painting of human being was a map. And so it could be like the map of the trade of your cyanide, like the reality, like the realism painting. And it could be the trade, the map of the motion of your body, of the action of your body. And anyway, it's all about the map of your mind. So sometimes it is like, it's like your suggestion, like when it is the map of your eyes, so it became like a representation. But when it became the result of your action, so it became kind of the trade. So of course we can also say the trade is kind of representation. But now we got some new situation, just like the other question is asking about like Google Earth, and we are discussing about the real-time map. And I think it's really a new, quite political, a new situation, like where a real-time map like make a new problem for like this kind of like internet rise. And so we are facing this uncertainty situation. I believe only when people is facing this uncertainty, he need a map. We never need a map in our family. So I think we need a map of map. That's why we have this issue.
Thank you so much. That ties in with what Philippe said about Pierre Boulez, who talks about the scar of the scar, the map of the map. Does anybody else on the panel want to answer this question? If not, we can take one last question, and I saw that there was a question here, yeah.
Hello?
So two last questions, two very brief last questions, yeah.
I guess I too was pretty taken by Julieta's description of the enjoyable moments from not knowing and from not mapping. And I was wondering, I guess a question to the astrophysicist on the panel, what would be at stake in mapping this dark matter in terms of our everyday experience, in terms of how it affects the way we understand the world, how we live?
What is at stake is we explore, we know it's there, we want to know where it is. It's what we always done. But if you want to think about our future, the dark matter is pulling us all together. And that picture of the lonely islands, the galaxies separated by millions of light years from each other, is actually only an illusion in that landscape. The landscape is all interconnected, but not by the atoms, but by those new particles. I think knowing that alone makes me happier, so.
I know we have to finish, so that was one last question. We can make 1 minute and then we conclude. Yeah. Okay, very, very briefly.
Okay, I very much like what this gentleman just said, but I just want to say that I think there's a phenomenological shift from the spatiality of Husserl to the temporality of Merleau-Ponty. And I think, we have to, in order to deal with the preeminence of uncertainty, which I see as tremendously positive in today's world, I think we have to think more about the question of temporality, not just the framing of a segment of what the population is doing at a particular time, but really understanding the ongoingness of what that phenomenon is all about. I think it's a perpetual survey of ourselves in relation to the world.
Thank you for this statement. Do we have a very last comment from the panel on this? Someone wants to answer? If not, we can conclude with this statement. I thank you all very, very much. Thanks a lot.